welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so we've just been digging through a pretty interesting set of sources.
Yeah.
And one idea really kept popping up, didn't it? This concept of designing for depth.
Absolutely. It was quite mysterious.
Like, forget just chasing scale for a minute. What the material seemed to be pointing towards is, well, building businesses around meaning, purpose, genuine connection.
Right.
That seems to be where the real edge is now.
Yeah.
In this kind of crowded world. Maybe depth is the new edge.
And meaning is the new moat, as the source put it.
Exactly.
And that theme, it really resonated. The sources we looked at, especially some bits referencing IPL 22.txt, they pointed to businesses doing exactly that, not just making money, but creating these, well, really curated experiences.
And fostering a sense of belonging.
Yes, precisely. It's a pretty compelling contrast to the purely transactional stuff you see everywhere.
Totally. And the sources, they specifically steered us towards one place that really gets into the how businesses do this depth thing. The Founder's Office with Sarthak Ahuja podcast.
Ah, yes. That came up quite a bit.
It was kind of flagged as a gold mine for, real-world examples. So I guess our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what the sources took from that podcast.
Extract those actionable insights.
Yeah, the blueprints, almost, for how you listening might build something that resonates deeply, not just, broadly.
And what seemed really valuable about that specific podcast, based on the source material, is how it goes beyond just the usual founder story, right?
Right. The material called it like getting this helicopter view of an industry, but then zooming right back in to give you actionable stuff.
Yeah.
Playbooks, roadmaps, blueprints even for starting and scaling.
Exactly. And according to the sources, that level of detail comes straight from the host, Sarthak Ahuja. His background, what was it, investment banker and CA?
Yeah.
That's not just fluff. It means he digs into the really nitty-gritty stuff.
Like what specifically?
Well, the unit economics, profitability models, supply chain issues, operations, marketing tactics, the actual cost of scaling, capital needs, inventory management, revenue models, even compliance stuff.
Wow.
The sources actually called that level of detail, and I think this was a direct quote, the jewel of the show.
That kind of breakdown is super rare.
Yeah.
And valuable. And the sources also mentioned you hear from, like, big industry names on the show.
Yeah, people like Chef Sanjeev Kapoor, Gaurav Srinagesh, Abhishek Ganguly from Puma, Shivakumar, who was at PepsiCo and Nokia. Big hitters.
So it sounds like if you're even thinking about building, say, a luxury brand or something aspirational or even a niche business.
Especially in India, which was the focus in the sources.
Right. Then this podcast is kind of like a crash course. You get the operator's view and the investor's perspective.
It really connects the what and why with the practical how.
Okay, cool. So the source material highlighted a few specific examples from that podcast that really show this designing for depth idea in action. Let's unpack the first one. It was about the business of private clubs, looking at the quorum.
Ah, the quorum. Yeah, this one's fascinating. It directly tackles that idea of creating a curated community.
How so?
Well, the sources described it as having this kind of Soho House vibe, but with a very distinct Indian entrepreneurial angle.
Okay.
It's tapping into that growing affluent class in India, people who are actively looking for that quintessential third space.
Somewhere that isn't work, isn't home.
Exactly. Somewhere they feel they really belong, comfortable, connected.
So what's the strategy then for a place like that to actually create that feeling?
Yeah.
According to the material.
It boils down to curation. The founder, Vivek Narain, apparently talks about how the main USP is being a space for just a select group.
Ah, the selection process.
Right. There's a vetting process. The sources really hammered this home. Exclusivity isn't just a byproduct, it's fundamental. The curated community itself is the product.
Interesting. So the value isn't just the fancy building.
No, it's who you're sharing it with. He specifically mentioned curating a homogeneous community, lifestyle, and culture.
Okay, so the community is the core offering.
Yeah.
How does that work as a business model then? How's it profitable?
Well, beyond the membership fees, the sources pointed out they use hospitality, events, their global network.
Yeah.
It's a few different revenue streams built around that core curated experience.
Got it. So the big takeaway, the growth nugget, the source pulled out. What was that?
That curation itself is basically the new luxury. Building a brand that actively chooses its members is just as crucial as the members choosing the brand. It's sort of an inversion.
It focuses on the quality of the community first.
Precisely. Very intentional.
That's powerful. Okay, let's switch gears. The next example the sources brought up tackles a totally different field, but hits a similar note. Inside India's most expensive gym, focusing on Knox.
Ah, Knox. Yeah.
Now, usually you think gym, you think weights, treadmills, maybe some classes.
Right. Standard stuff.
But the source material painted Knox as something quite different.
Totally. Joel Pinto, the co-founder, apparently talked about building a whole ecosystem, not just a workout spot.
An ecosystem. Okay, what does that involve based on what we read?
Well, it includes things like wellness therapies, a health cafe, even athleisure retail.
So much more than just fitness.
Exactly. And crucially, really fostering that sense of community among the members. It's about a whole lifestyle experience going way beyond the workout itself. It sort of redefines premium wellness in that context.
And the podcast episode, according to the source, actually got into the weeds of how they make it work financially.
Yeah, apparently they discuss the pricing strategy, their trainer culture, and this really specific detail. They break even at, what was it, $40K per month per client.
Wow, that's specific. The source called it luxury fitness decoded. That number really tells a story.
It does. It shows the kind of investment needed, but also the potential return when you build something truly premium and community-focused.
So what was the key lesson? The growth nugget from Knox?
Basically, in a super crowded industry like fitness, you can't just compete on the basic product. You need to build beyond that.
Create a space people want to belong to.
Exactly. Not just buy from, but belong to.
That really echoes the quorum idea, doesn't it? That sense of belonging.
It does.
Okay, third example, another shift. The business of senior living. Looking at Antara. The sources seemed really keen on how this area is being rethought.
Yeah, moving way beyond the old, kind of grim stereotypes of old age homes. And Antara's approach, as highlighted, fits perfectly with this depth and empathy theme. The founder, Tara Vachani, discussed focusing on holistic wellness, yes, luxury residences, but crucially, building resident-driven communities.
Resident-driven.
Meaning the residents have a real say in shaping the community life. The source mentioned the market opportunity like 1,000 CR, but the conversation seemed much more focused on the how and why.
Designing a life experience, not just accommodations.
Precisely. And the podcast apparently dug into how their model balances the essentials care architecture with deep compassion.
Compassion as part of the business model.
Exactly. And it's all backed by data and a clear vision. This is where depth becomes so critical, you know? Businesses dealing with long-term life stages, they need empathy just as much, if not more, than efficiency.
That really leads into the insight the source pulled out, doesn't it? That businesses for these life stages need that empathy.
Absolutely. You have to know your user, your resident in this case, incredibly deeply.
And design with dignity. That word dignity really stood out.
It did. So if you kind of step back and look at these three decks, the private club, the high-end gym, the senior living community.
Very different businesses.
Totally different sectors. But the common thread, as the source has highlighted, is moving beyond the simple transaction.
Right.
It's about intentionally curating that community, creating these really comprehensive, thoughtful experiences.
And approaching the customer, the member, the resident, with genuine understanding and empathy.
That seems to be the core of designing for depth.
So the question for you listening then becomes, how do you apply this? Whether you're building something new, leading a team, engaging with an audience, how can you design for that depth, that sense of belonging?
You know, the material we reviewed had this reflection prompt that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
It was basically asking, how are you personally creating a sense of belonging in whatever you do?
In your work.
Yeah. Do your colleagues, your clients, your audience, do they feel genuinely seen, involved, connected through what you're putting out there?
And are you actually open to making that real connection? It's a two-way street.
Exactly. It came back to that idea that community isn't just about scale or numbers.
It starts with presence.
Yeah, presence. Creating a space, virtual or physical, where people feel they genuinely belong.
So to wrap it up, this deep dive, looking through the lens of the sources at examples like those from the Founders Office podcast,
Yeah.
it really hammers home this idea, doesn't it?
That designing for depth, for meaning, for belonging. It's not just a nice to have anymore.
It's becoming a real competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. For building businesses that last, that resonate.
And crucially, as the source material stressed about that podcast, it's not just about the big ideas.
Right. The value is also in the specifics. Understanding the unit economics, the operational details, the financial models.
The practical side. You need that to actually execute these depth-focused strategies successfully.
For sure. And maybe that leaves us with a final thought to chew on, building on what the sources suggested. Instead of just asking, what product or service am I selling? Maybe shift the question. Ask yourself, how can I intentionally create a space or an experience where people feel they truly belong?
That's a different way of looking at it.
Think about the difference that shift could make, whatever your context is.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.